It's a math part of it, which always stood strong with real estate. But now it's associate feedback that's coming into play too, that qualitative associate feedback, those NPS scores. And because we have the ability to pivot, and because we have the ability to be able to deliver nuanced hospitality, brand appropriate hospitality in spaces, because we can, we should.
Hi, I'm Rob Sadow, and you're listening to the Flex Perspectives podcast, where we interview the world's best thinkers, researchers, and operators on how to make flexible work work. Flex Perspectives is brought to you by Flex Index, the leading global data set for company-specific approaches to flexible work. Flex Index represents more than 9,000 companies, 75,000 office locations, and 100 million people. Today, my guest is Suzanne Heidelberger. Suzanne is an incredibly experienced real estate executive with leadership stints at Fidelity, Amex, and Skadden Arps. In this episode, Suzanne talks about hospitality and the mentality of earning the trip to the office. She shares how to think about your workplace as an extension of your employer brand and employee value proposition, plus specific strategies for building more effective relationships with senior executives, HR, and IT to support hybrid work. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us out by subscribing and giving us a rating. Helps us understand what episodes our listeners find most valuable and helps new listeners find the podcast.
This episode of Flex Perspectives is brought to you by Office Benchmarks. In today's hybrid world, workplace executives face critical lease and space allocation decisions. Make the wrong move and it could cost millions, impact productivity, and hurt retention. You need reliable data, not news headlines. That's why companies like TD Bank, Southwest, and Chime rely on Office Benchmarks. Office Benchmarks is the only solution that combines flexible work policy and office usage metrics to help workplace leaders compare their footprint, space design, and usage to peers with similar policies. Get started today at flex.scoopforwork.com.
Suzanne, I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Thank you. It's going to be a great conversation, I think. Thank you, Rob.
So one of the things I love about you and from our conversations in the past is you have held all of these really important real estate and workplace roles at huge companies, but you're kind of like me, you're like an analyst at heart in a way and like deep into data. And so tell me a little bit about your early story, how you got started, and how that ultimately kind of like led you into real estate in the first place.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll tell you, I'm not your average bear. I grew up in Egypt. I grew up on Long Island. I've traveled around the world just because of the way that my family lived. My dad and grandfather were both architects. And, with the architecture, there's a little bit of, there's a lot of logic and a lot of art. And that kind of ties together in my brain also. When I graduated, I went to the hotel school at Cornell University and I wanted to build hotels. When I graduated, horrible economy, no one was building anything and I had to support myself. So I learned how to do real estate valuations, which are looking at income and costs for every kind of real estate and putting values on it and really coming down to the analytics of what future value and current value is for bricks and mortar.
And were you always pretty quantitatively oriented, or was that kind of like something that you thought would be something you'd spend a lot of time on, or is that pretty different from where you had studied or focused in school?
I always loved math. But there was a design bent also. And funnily enough, some of the artwork that I did in high school, I have up on my walls in my house now. So kind of cool stuff. But yes, I love math, always did, always loved math and science and really getting into the how and the why and the what. Not necessarily always getting the right answer, but really enjoying the process.
Of course. I feel like that's half the battle in some ways. Were there particular things or types of assets that you found yourself spending time on from a valuation perspective? Was it all different types of real estate, more office oriented? Curious what that was like.
Yeah, starting my journey, I valued everything from hotels to retail strip malls to industrial buildings to cantaloupe fields. And then I really started to focus more and more on office space and, that heavy commercial. Then I went into business valuations. And so looked at valuing the business where it was airlines or, big retail companies, and valuing the real estate and then valuing the operations also. So really combining the operation part of it, where the revenue comes from, as well as the value of the real estate. So kind of cross back and forth. But probably if I had to say, office valuation was my broadest group of work.
And so what led you to cross the chasm from valuing all these different types of assets and properties to saying, hey, maybe I actually want to be involved in, thinking about operating them, or what it means to kind of like be in that field more directly, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a funny journey. I took a vacation. I went to Africa and I went a camera safari, amazing trip. And I climbed Kilimanjaro. And as I climbed Kilimanjaro, it was 4.5 days up, 1.5 down, doing something I'd never, ever thought I would do and wasn't sure that I could, even in the middle of it. Coming back down, I decided, you know what, I really want to go deep in an area and really move out of the consulting field into more of a own your decisions arena. And so that's where I got into corporate real estate. That was my first step in after that trip to Kilimanjaro. And I did summit, by the way, and made it down just fine.
That's amazing. And incredible to have such an amazing moment in life that also gave you such clarity around what you wanted to be doing in your professional life.
Yeah. It was an unexpected benefit.
And so what was that first foray into more of an operating role? Tell me about your first experience doing that.
Yeah, it was, I went to go work for JP Morgan. I lived in New York City, and JP Morgan had a job in corporate real estate. I didn't really know what corporate real estate was. But as I soon found out, in real estate valuations, big numbers are good. And because that means you're getting more income. And in corporate real estate, big numbers are not so good because it means you're spending more. So it was a little flip of my brain that way that had to kind of turn around. But I found that I really loved it. Amazing, amazing team to work with. I learned so much. That was really my first foray into working internationally and looking at international leases and, how that analysis works. And I was an analyst. I ran numbers for different lease deals and got to sit in on the negotiation conversations and, really learn from the best in that way. I was lucky.
It sounds like drinking from the fire hose a little bit in terms of going from the math of it to then all of the different components of what it means to transact around the real estate.
Yeah, for sure.
And so at some point in there, and you were talking about your experience and your family from an architecture perspective and that blending of art and math. At some point, the analytics, became part of the answer, but also the experience of what it means to go into a space and how to think about that. Was that at JP Morgan or was that later? Like, what kind of started to tie those things together for you as an operator thinking about office?
Yeah, it's interesting. So as I moved from JP Morgan to Skadden Arps, which was a law firm, 500 partners, so I had 500 bosses, and all looking for a slightly different bent on the experience. Global company, really worked all over the world, but the definition of good changes as you move around the world, particularly in those qualitative, local nuanced aspects. The math always remains the same. And so probably Skadden was the first time that I started to think about the experience and how to influence using not only math, but considering the qualitative aspects of an experience. So it probably started at Skadden. Then from Skadden, I went to Deutsche Bank, and a lot of what we were doing, we're looking at how the spaces are working, where they needed to be, and and how old they were, and when they needed to be refreshed, and should we refresh in London or should we refresh in Pune? All of those kind of decisions really came into play. And then moving into my journey at American Express, that's where not only was there a nod towards experience and those kind of local nuances, the concept of hospitality in a workspace really was launched. And our goal for our real estate team at American Express was that we wanted our internal service to our associates and visitors to be as great as the external service that American Express delivers to its card members. And we put that right out there. So that was a high bar to start out with. And that really brought along an evolution of hospitality in a workplace and really thinking about that workplace experience. Now, not to forget that you're running a business and it's a big P&L. And so math always comes into play. But how do you layer in hospitality? And boy, oh boy, did I got in touch with my old professors at Cornell at the hotel school, asked them to come in, let's have conversations. How do we bring an experience of hospitality, of the feeling that you get as you walk into an amazing resort hotel experience? And how do you create that same kind of feeling within an office space? And then how do you, as a team, deliver differently? And really, really interesting journey there, which then I brought to Fidelity, and we delivered at Fidelity as well.
So I want to go back to Amex for a second because I think it's such an interesting example. And it sounds like it really came downstream from the culture and the operating model of the company, in terms of how do you think about what Amex does and the relationship it has with card members. As a result, how do you think about the relationship that you want to build through real estate and office with employees? Do you think that that's inherent only to companies that have that kind of mindset around customer that kind of like leads them there, and then other companies think about office differently? Or is it something that kind of like all companies need to kind of find that type of mindset the same way they think about customer, in terms of the orientation around the office experience?
Well, look, I think every company has a different brand. Every company has a different culture. The way that a company's product is delivered, it's delivered by people and machines. So how do you want those people to feel? What is the vision that that leadership wants an employee base to emulate? And that can be translated into hospitality services within a space. For sure, if there are customers, outside customers, they are feeling the culture, they're feeling the vision, they're feeling the brand also. So there's no question that you can translate, but every company has a different vision, a different brand, that the concept of hospitality should tie in with that vision, that feeling, that culture, that brand. You can't just say, we did this at this company, and so we should do the same thing at another company, because the concept of hospitality, customer service to employees and visitors really is to be delivered in a pretty authentic way. Otherwise, it feels pretty fake. And it's kind of the, thanks so much for coming. Can I help you? How do I help you? It becomes very, very rote, and there's no feeling to it. And the whole reason that you bring hospitality into a space is to create a good feeling.
One of the things I love about the way you talk about this is it reflects a desire or almost a belief that you are earning the visit from the employee to come into the office, and that the experience designed almost as if they have, a choice around whether they go in. And this is in years that were, prior to the pandemic and prior to the advent of hybrid work. Was there a seminal moment that kind of shifted your thinking in that direction in terms of the experience you're delivering and kind of like getting it to a place where you felt like you really earned that visit from employees around the experience of the office?
Yeah, really, really good question, Rob. I think as a leader, you are always trying to build a high performance team. And you build a high performance team by motivating, by, having team members be engaged, and bringing their all, their spirit, their creativity, their intelligence to delivering the product. And every leader at a company wants that to happen within their teams. And so how do you do that? You make them feel appreciated. You make them feel heard. You deliver hospitality to them, and you earn their motivation, creativity, and delivery. So it's not just coming into the office, but it's actually everyday aspects of delivering what's needed to build a high-performing team. So that's with the current team. That then creates ripples of brand awareness out in the employment market. And then guess what? Great talent starts to hear what great high-performing teams and what the great experiences within the company, and they all want to come. So it's not just earning the visit into the office. It's actually attracting and retaining top talent so that you can maintain the best product, the best delivery, and those high-performing teams.
As it really sounds like treating the office in some ways an extension of the entire brand and employee value proposition, and not thinking about it as this is a place that people have to go to, and as a result, it needs to be functional and performative, but rather, how does this reflect on who we are entirely in the experience that we're trying to deliver for customers and employees? And as a result, has ripple effects much more broadly, it sounds like.
Tremendously. I mean, remember that movie, Joe versus the Volcano? Oof. If you think about Office Space just as a place people come to work, go look at that movie. Oof.
I love that. So this, one of the things I think is so interesting about your background is you had a front seat to this for years and through multiple tours of duty at really important companies. And then all of a sudden the pandemic happens, and you've got to think about this from a perspective of, well, now everyone doesn't go into the office every day necessarily. And so, what part about that felt very natural in some ways relative to the experience you had already been thinking about? And what parts were new or hard that you really had to grapple with as you kind of like shifted that paradigm around?
Yeah. Great question. No matter what, there are aspects to, delivering space in a pandemic, in a crisis that stand strong all the time. And that is, the space has to be safe, and, and communication needs to happen really, really well. And, I think as the pandemic hit, bringing that communication out about, of course, the spaces are clean. Of course, the spaces are safe. Happy to talk about it. Here's what we're doing. And, we had all these levels of cleaning that would happen, but it wasn't anything truly different than what had happened before. It just was being talked about. So that actually wasn't that different. The most crises last about a week, 2 weeks tops. So the duration of this was just immense, and really became crisis management became business as usual. So that was definitely different. The other part of it was that prior to the pandemic, people worked remotely. There was hybrid work, but the hybrid was kind of the plus one to being in the office, and the experience was definitely a plus one to being in the office. Through the pandemic, actually, it provided amazing opportunities to be able to deliver services that really had been overlooked before. So delivering services to fully remote teams or hybrid teams, what amazing creative opportunities that really hadn't been focused on before. And so, we tried a few things. A bunch of it worked, some of it didn't work. And this was when we were at Fidelity. But it was really an opportunity to look at, kind of with the same vein, how do we deliver great hospitality to team members that can't actually connect all the time? We launched, I hired my first hospitality professional to come join me at Fidelity and build this program together. The first day in the office was March 13th, 2020, literally
Wow.
the day that everybody got moved out. So front and center of the conversation was, how do we deliver hospitality in this new environment? How do we deliver in a digital world? And there were a couple things. First, we thought, okay, some people need to come in no matter what. How do we deliver hospitality to those teams? There weren't many, in a scheme of 65,000, there weren't many, but there were teams that had to come in. So how do we deliver hospitality to those team members? Making sure that they are leaving the day feeling good, feeling strong, with a smile on their face, ready to go again, bringing their all so that they could be a high-performing team for Fidelity. So really interesting journey there. And then the creativity started. Okay, how do we bring the concept of hospitality to a digital team? And, we did a couple of things. We brought in, we had some gyms and fitness areas. And so our trainers would put together live and virtual, live and recorded programs for 5-minute stretch breaks, 30-minute yogas, et cetera, all different kinds of classes that our team members remotely could dial into. There would be interaction. People could be seen. It wasn't just watching a recording. Now, if they wanted to do it 11 o'clock at night, they could access a recording. That was just fine also. One of the most popular things, actually, were these 5-minute stretch breaks. So leaders would say, okay, Rob, trainer, come in. I'm having a meeting at 10 o'clock. Come in at 10:55. Come into my Zoom and let's do a 5-minute stretch break with my team on the call. And I'll tell you, Rob, when you have screens of people all going like this and stretching and leaning down, it's goofy. It's a bonding moment. And actually, the stretching is really good for you. There's a wellness aspect to this. So, that was pretty strong. The other thing that we did that was kind of cool, we set up a virtual childcare. And so we had an hour. We split ages up of kids into 4 different groups, and we had an hour of programming a day live for each of these groups of kids. And we brought in, remember, the zoos were closed. And so, but the zoologists, the zookeepers, they were all in the zoos still. So they would come on and they would talk about anteaters and horses and elephants. We had our chefs in the kitchen or in their own kitchens doing cooking demos and talking about nutrition. We had our fitness team members either in their homes or in the Fidelity gyms doing stretch breaks and doing stretching and doing kid yoga, all age appropriate. We ran that for months and months and months. Won some awards, which was kind of cool. And then turned it off when we didn't think it was necessary anymore. And we got a lot of feedback from our team members. Hey, we need that. Our kids are back from school break. We need it again. And so boom, we popped it in again. So, it's just those opportunities where you see where's hardship, where's friction, and how can we creatively solve it. It's such fun.
It's such an amazing story to me for a couple of reasons. One piece of it that I just love is, it's such a orientation and a perfect example of saying, okay, how do I delight employees, even at a time that's just incredibly stressful and difficult for lots of people for lots of reasons? Like, how can I innovate on this experience? And if you chase that, there is opportunity to kind of innovate on that, even where others may not see it, if they did kind of think about it from that perspective. And the other piece that I love about it is, these are team members that you're already working with in different capacities, right? They're parts of the team who can do something that's really additive in a different way. And it's not just engaging for those families and those kids, but it's probably really engaging for them also to be able to do it and still feel like they're contributing in that way. And so, and the thought process around I have these team members, I have these assets, I can think about different ways to deliver services and actually drive a great experience, I think is a really special story.
Yeah, Rob, it's so interesting because people were mortally fearful. And so just trying to make their day a little brighter was actually a gift that we could give. And I think however we could contribute was internally very fulfilling for each person that was part of it.
I love that. So now we're 4 years past that initial March moment, right? At least in the US for around COVID. Companies are still trying to figure out how do we settle into what work looks like and how do we use the office or not, and how do we deliver services appropriately inside the 4 walls versus digitally or remotely. One area that I want to explore with you, just because you spent so much time thinking about this, is part of it is the math has changed a lot for a workplace executive or thinking about a real estate team trying to deliver those services. Maybe can you take me a little bit through, if it's back in 2018, 2019, how do you think about space and big picture, how much space you need and the math around that? And how has that gotten more nuanced or more complicated in a world where people aren't necessarily in the office every day?
Yeah, great question. Pre 2018, it was called bricks and mortar because it was standing there and it was stable and it was not adjusting. Bricks and mortar. And so the level of measurement was really, what do you have? And there was kind of a an acknowledgement that there wasn't a whole lot of change that could happen, that it was what it was. Bad decisions were made, good decisions were made. And that's the way it was. I think as we've moved into this new world of working differently and having different real estate product available, this ability to be able to pivot and make changes pretty quickly, way quicker than a 5-10 year lease ever allowed in the past. That has really changed the way that we can grab opportunities. And whether it's opportunities in great real estate markets, great opportunities in great talent markets, that's a big deal. The other thing is that it's not in the past. There may have been employee surveys done of, pulse scores for different spaces. And I remember at American Express, we'd have a pulse score twice a year. And we would get the comments back on the building. And I remember the first time I started to read the comments, I was mortally offended. How could they say that? Don't they know that we're doing our best? Oh, I can't believe this. And I kind of had to put it down. And then I actually I had a long plane ride somewhere, probably Australia. And I pulled it up again and I started to read through and just let the comments flow through and started to pick up trends of, what was going on. I removed my emotions from it and just let the information flow through as data. And that allowed some trends to come out, and it was, Suzanne's brain doing data analytics, so it probably wasn't great, but it was a start. And that allowed us to start to shift based on what our associates were saying in the space. Now, that was way back, and our ability to shift and deliver different things sometimes was possible and sometimes wasn't. But it tended to be optional for the real estate team. Now, it's not optional anymore. That material's got to be gathered. Those comments have to be gathered. They have to be looked at. They have to be acknowledged. They have to be thought about, and change has to happen based on those aspects. So it's kind of it's a math part of it, which always stood strong with real estate. But now it's associate feedback that's coming into play too, that qualitative associate feedback, those NPS scores. That comes into play now. And because we have the ability to pivot, and because we have the ability to be able to deliver nuanced hospitality, brand appropriate hospitality in spaces, because we can, we should.
Is there a different skill set required now, you think, for a workplace executive to be able to deliver around it? Is it different either quantitatively or the types of feedback you need to be able to ingest or who you collaborate with that you think is fundamentally changed in any way from where it was 5 years ago?
I think that, good leaders understand building strong teams and building strong financial businesses. And that's the same. Maybe the muscle of thinking about and broadening the muscle of building strong teams, building strong employee bases across an organization, maybe that hasn't been used too much because there was so much emphasis on the math. But I don't think it's a new skill set. I just think it's a muscle that, maybe wasn't used as broadly as it really needs to be now. Does that make sense?
And it does make sense. And as you think about how workplace executives that maybe need to dust off that playbook, or they need to kind of like strengthen that muscle that maybe is atrophied or wasn't getting as much attention as it should. How do you go down that path? Like if you talk to other workplace executives, like what are the actions you suggest that they take to start to be able to bring those skills back or be more well-rounded in the way that they think about how they invest and think about the experience of their space?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely, looking outside and looking inside. So thinking about, how do you like to be treated? How do you lead your teams? What kind of feedback do you get as a manager? How can you bring that forward and actually strengthen it and actually talk about it out loud? That's pretty powerful to talk about building high performing teams and how that happens out loud. That's not necessarily discussed. Financial delivery and goal achievement, particularly on the quantitative side, that's talked about all the time. But actually, how do you influence high performing teams? Talking about it more, I think, would be really great. And so there's an internal reflection that you have to do about how do you want to be treated? How do you want to lead a team? And then talking with others about that and seeing how they're doing it. That then builds the skill set in this, kind of jungle gym of a web, to saying, hey, I have an idea that can make a difference in our workplace, and let's give it a go.
Do you think the composition of that team needs to change or look different today? Is it the same, for example, is it the same kind of skill sets and the same backgrounds, for example, that more typically comprise a workplace or a real estate team? Or do you need to hire for slightly different backgrounds or different types of experiences relevant to some of the changing dynamics and fluidity of the way the workplace is today?
Well, the thing I love about real estate is that, there's still the bricks and mortar side, but there's what happens in the space also. And having a team that, can deliver those. So, some subject matter experts, it's always going to be necessary. But having a team that understands, what it's like to provide customer service and move along that journey, that's pretty powerful. And I'll say at Amex, at Fidelity, it's not as if we had like a broad change of team members as we moved through this hospitality journey, but we did go through training. We did go through an education program of how to think about customer service and, words that you can use and reflections that you can do as a family member, as a neighbor, as a coworker, and as part of the real estate team, so that every person on the real estate team was delivering hospitality, not just a small group. And that's a pretty amazing journey to go through with a larger team, smaller team as well. But for everyone to kind of be using the same words or a few buzzwords that you can use, and when you use them consistently, when you recognize that other people are delivering great customer service and acknowledging that, catching people doing things right, and then when a team collectively at the same time just delivers a little smidge of hospitality to others, it feels like a wave of hospitality, and people like it. And so you deliver a little bit, and you get some really great feedback. And so, okay, I'm going to go do that again. And you deliver more, and it builds and builds. It's a really interesting journey. I think the skill sets for delivering great real estate portfolios, that's not going to change. We need those professionals. It's really, really, really important. And they need to be, respected and acknowledged and celebrated in a big, big, big way. Everyone can deliver a little bit of hospitality as well. Just feels good.
To that point, it feels like that job has gotten a lot harder, it seems to me, over the years, and in particular in terms of what it means to deliver a great portfolio, especially in a world where, things are more dynamic. And I think about even recent experience you've had at Fidelity, thinking about the intersection of policy around hybrid work and flexible work and what's right for the space and how those things fit together. Can you talk a little bit about how you even thought through that, and who do you have to engage to kind of like get those things to fit together in concert in a way that leads to a great experience in space and something that from a policy and employee experience perspective makes sense relative to what the company is trying to accomplish?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, look, it's really, making sure that the real estate team is working towards a common goal. So, that's one leg of the stool, the real estate team working towards a common goal and prioritizing, really in black and white, what needs to happen to get to that goal. So listing it out, this is where my data and my numbers come in, having a full point of view about an approach to delivering an improved portfolio delivery. So that's number one. The second leg of the stool, really, in the way that we work now, on the policy side, as you said, is HR. And so, really making sure that the return to work policies and the future hiring are fully in sync with what the real estate team wants to do. And if they're not, then probably the real estate team needs to adjust to what the HR team needs to be delivered. And then you layer in IT, the technology side of it. We are in a digital world. So much innovation is happening in terms of tools and the way people connect, and the ability to elevate the experience within the real estate and digitally. That to really very, very strong partnership with the IT team and take a look at those priorities. What's the vision? What's the goal? Where are we going? And is HR, is the real estate team, and is the technology team in sync with the prioritization and the approach? And then senior management, and making sure that the three legs of the stool, HR, real estate, and technology, are tied in with where the leaders of the business want to go. Super, super important. A lot of conversations happening.
Totally. And one of the things I hear quite often from, if there's a gripe that I hear from real estate executives or workplace executives that are thinking through this, is there's a feeling sometimes that they're brought in too late, too downstream in the process. And there's a change in policy or point of view, and the team had already been moving in a different direction in terms of how are they thinking about what leases to keep or to get rid of, or where to expand space or contract space. And they feel like they have to kind of like rush to meet that adjustment. Is one of the things I hear quite often. How do you encourage, or how do you suggest that workplace executives help get themselves into that conversation earlier if they're not? Like, is there a better way for them to build partnerships or to bring data? Like, how do you make sure that you're early enough in that conversation to form it in a way that the whole thing makes sense together in the stool, as you were suggesting?
Sure. Well, I mean, look, sometimes things happen. Businesses change. There's a merger and acquisition, and there isn't the ability to actually be brought on any earlier. And the skill set, the muscles to be able to pivot quickly, grab an opportunity, say, yes, of course we can. Let's go make it happen. That's powerful. But where, if it's about relationship building. And by the way, hospitality is about relationship building. So when you treat others with graciousness, with hospitality, it comes back. And so just really, when you don't need to have a conversation, have a conversation. When you don't need to, bring a tray of cookies to a meeting, bring a tray of cookies to the meeting. It goes a long way. I bake bread. I don't know what it is. Banana bread, cornbread. I bake bread. It's part of my Zen, and I end up making extra so I can give it away as gifts. So I'll go into a meeting where I don't need to. And you know what? That breaks these barriers down pretty quickly. Not to say that it's going to be perfect, but it allows the conversation to happen. Hey, you know what? I would love you do a monthly, catch-up call, or you do a quarterly projection. Would love to see that. Could we have could we do that? When you bring a little goodie, it breaks down the barriers, it allows those conversations to happen. And so it's part of the relationship building that gives you the heads up. And it may not be we're definitely doing this, but it may be, hey, we're thinking about this, or yeah, I was just traveling to blah, blah, blah. And then in your head, you're thinking, okay, they're going to blah, blah, blah. That means there might be something happening going down there. Let's go take a look at what the situation real estate wise is. It's all of those points, intelligence gathering, that help to create a better relationship, and just makes it so much easier for the rest of your real estate team to be able to deliver with success.
I love that. It sounds like there's a piece, and it always comes back to that art and science, right? Like there's a piece which is the relationship orientation and that hospitality orientation, and thinking about what it means to engage in that way. There's a piece of it that feels like the data around, do I understand what's going on in these different spaces, and can I go look when it seems like maybe there's something there so I'm not behind on that topic. So I love how, again, it's that marriage of both sides in terms of like, how do you be most successful in this type of role or in this type of environment?
So far it's worked for me. So knock on wood.
Well, in that spirit, any other best practices that you would share around how, as a workplace executive in this world, you interface most effectively with senior management or with HR? Are there cadences or types of updates or things like that that you found to be really useful or that you've honed over the years that maybe others could learn from in terms of how they think about strengthening the way that they operate in that capacity?
Yeah, it's funny. I learned this from my boss at Deutsche Bank. And it's a concept he called it a 515. And it was supposed to be a report done at 5 o'clock to take 15 minutes. Well, never happened at 5 o'clock and never took 15 minutes. But what it was, I said to my team, it's a weekly update. And what it is, it's a written summary of what's going on. The good, bad, and the ugly. If there's something confidential, highlight it so that I know that it's confidential. But what it is, it's a weekly update of what's going on in their world. And so on a couple of things, it really helped. So I would take those weekly updates, read them, put them into a newsletter, and on a weekly basis, send it out to the real estate team and the constituents of the real estate team. So anyone at any given time had at least not more than a week's old data about what was going on in that project, that location. There was one from the design and construction team, one from the transactions team, one from the hospitality team, one from the operations team, one from the relationship management team. And I would layer them and it was a pretty long newsletter because each of those weekly updates were in there. It allowed my one-to-one time with my direct reports to be about them, the team, what they needed me to focus on. It wasn't those data updates that would have taken up all of our time. So actually, it allowed us to have richer, more robust, way more helpful conversations when we were able to connect. It also allowed that material to go out to the rest of the real estate, which, as I said, and if someone was in project delivery, but maybe was interested in learning about how to do a transaction, they could read that part of the transactions report to get an update on what was going on with the team and the deals that we were doing. Nothing confidential, but enough to be able to cross-pollinate and have a little professional development for themselves. Now, the coolest thing that we did, and kind of we innovated on this one, was at the beginning of the weekly update, we'd have an area called shoutouts. And it was each of my direct reports had the opportunity to call out team members that were doing great stuff, catch people doing things right, either within their team or somewhere else, or not even within the real estate group. And those shout outs would go in the beginning of the newsletter. The updates would run below. The names of the people were highlighted. Now, I don't know that everyone read, I'm sure not, the entire weekly update, but everyone looked at those shout outs because they wanted to see if their name was mentioned. So that was a really powerful way to actually pull the team together, but also to let my manager, senior leaders, and my stakeholders in HR and technology, communications, legal, many other areas know what was going on within the real estate group. So it was, I wouldn't say it was radical transparency, but it was more than had ever happened before. And I think those aspects were pretty helpful. I didn't see it happening anywhere else where I went. So I think, that was pretty good. We also, during COVID, started every 2 weeks town halls. And we did our stretch breaks, our 5-minute stretch breaks, but it was really a call for us, by us. It was all digital. And I would usually have a guest speaker, but anybody could raise their hand to announce a new team member joining. And then that new team member would be able to have their moment to kind of introduce themselves, to really bring together this hybrid group and stay close. It took, a lot of coordination and actually quite frequent points where people could come in and connect, hear what was going on, have their moment to grab the microphone, and have a moment to celebrate. So I think those two things, the weekly update and the every 2-week town hall, we called them, it was the Fidelity Real Estate Company, was the name of our group, FREC. And so we called them FREC Chats. And they worked pretty well.
I love that. And it's so applicable even to a world where you're not in the office every day necessarily together, right? Like that same good hygiene around team management and digital communication is then extrapolatable beyond team to cross-functional partners and others and engages them. And what I love about that too is that I imagine it leads to conversations where someone sees something in an update and says, oh, I actually should connect the dot on this and we should talk about that. And people are more forthcoming with their own data, and what's going on when they see that you're transparent. And so it's in the same spirit of not only the data and information, but also breaking down silos and relationship building in a way that's helpful for broader collaboration.
Yeah, completely agree, Rob. And really, really what they did is they were tools to build the brand of the real estate team.
Which it's the same idea, right? Same concept of like, how do you think about brand of company, real estate team, office? I love that. I love that consistent thought process around it.
That's great. That's right.
Any other parting thoughts on this topic that we haven't covered, or pieces of advice for workplace executives that are burning in your mind that maybe we should talk about for a second before we wrap up?
Oh, I love learning. And so, any things that are happening, let's just keep talking about it. It's really an exciting time. Real estate has never stopped evolving. It's not going to stop evolving. And that's what makes it interesting and a fantastic place to have a career.
I love that. For folks who feel like they learned a lot and would love to learn more about you or follow the things you're thinking about, is there any place in particular you would send them, where you write or where you consult or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is pretty good. Or they can just contact me and I'm happy to have a chat.
Perfect. Well, Suzanne, I really appreciate you taking the time. I find you so insightful on this topic. And as you and I have talked about so many times, your background both in thinking analytically, but also in thinking from a hospitality perspective, I think is just so purpose-built for this moment and where real estate and workplace is. And so thank you for imparting some of your wisdom here.
Rob, you're very kind. And I have so much kudos for you as well. I love what you're doing, how you're doing it, and your plans for the future. Pretty exciting.
You're too kind. Thank you very much. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please also consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that helps other listeners find the podcast. For more Flex Index content, including past episodes, our Flex Index newsletter, and monthly research reports, visit flex.scoopforwork.com. See you next time.